Good evening. Hey, love it. I'm Alison Brown, President and CEO of the Science Museum of Minnesota, and we are meeting on Dakota people's land. We recognize their continuing connection to land, water, and community. And tonight, we want to help preserve those resources and welcome you to Climate Reality Community Gathering, along with our partners for our 24 Hours of Reality, Truth, and Action, a global conversation on the truth of climate crisis and how we can solve it. One of the biggest and least talked about challenges of the climate crisis is that it's felt more acutely and the solutions are less within reach for those with the fewest amount of resources, and we have to change that. We can address the climate crisis and turn truth into bold solutions. This is not a new topic for the Science Museum of Minnesota. Initiatives like our heat recovery project reduced our CO2 emissions by 30% since the year 2013. Our Director of Global Change Initiatives, Pat Hamilton, helped us implement that project, and he's leading us to test new initiatives that will reduce our CO2 emissions by 50% by the year 2030. We do science at the Science Museum, and we share that science with you and the solutions so we stay informed on climate change. From our researchers at a St. Croix Watershed Research Station to our STEM programming and educational outreach experts, we are using science to find solutions, and we share that information with you and with ourselves. Next spring, we will be celebrating Earth Day's 50th anniversary in April 2020. There will be a kickoff event, a year-long celebration celebrating our super science heroes. You are heroes as well, and a continuing conversation about what we can all do together to help protect our planet. We hope you will join us then, and if you would like to participate in that celebration or be a volunteer, if your organization would like to join us, please go to this website, smm.org/climate-reality, and there will be a page there where you can sign up and join us for that celebration. So tonight, we host our partners to this climate change conversation because we cannot do this alone. We all have to do this together. City of St. Paul, Climate Generation Will Stigger, as Legacy, the St. Paul chapter of the Climate Reality Project, the Coven, the St. Paul Public Library, and of course, you, our community members who will take action, who will create change. Thank you. This is just the beginning of these partnerships. With our scientific findings, we'll turn truth into bold actions that we can all act on. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce one of the Science Museum of Minnesota's newest trustees, and our mayor, Mayor Melvin Carter. Thank you.
I'm excited to be here, and this is why. This summer I got a chance to testify in Washington, D.C. about the impacts of climate reality. And one of the things that I shared with them is when we talk about our climate crisis, we're not always talking about a city like St. Paul. Cities like St. Paul don't always come to the top of our mind when we think around the country. We think of the coastal cities, or we think of New Orleans and those types of cities. But the conversation about reality is important. So let's check our reality. We know that of the 10 largest flood levels we've had in our city's history, that 3 of them have happened in the past few years alone. we know that just living in this community, we know that we've experienced more extreme winter weather events than we're used to getting in our community. Don't we know that? We know that. We know that the freeze-thaw cycles are creating an incredible amount of wear and tear on our roads every single year. You've noticed that, haven't you? And anybody who's spent any time around this window and around this river probably knows that just recently, in my first year as mayor, we had 400,000 pounds of limestone crash down from the bluffs onto Wabasha Avenue just across the street, just across the river from where we are right now. I will always remember that day, and it was the last Saturday in April in 2018. And the reason I remember that it was the last Saturday in April of 2019 is because had it been the first Saturday in May, it would have fallen on our Cinco de Mayo parade. So the reality for St. Paul is that climate crisis is a crisis for us. The reality is that climate crisis is costing us as taxpayers an incredible amount of money. The reality is that climate crisis is impacting the day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month costs for all of us, but most particularly for our lowest income residents. The reality is that those of us who are passionate about equity and eliminating disparities have got to add to our list a passion about addressing our climate reality and the climate crisis that we face, because the reality is there really is no difference between taking care of our earth and taking care of ourselves, our families, and our children. And so I'm excited to be here and appreciative of you joining our reality conversation. And as you know, we're joining a global conversation here with 24 hours of reality, right? And 24 hours of reality, Twin Cities response. This conversation was seeded by our former Vice President Al Gore when he came in this past summer and trained hundreds of us. And this conversation won't just be a one-time thing. This is about the action that we take together. I am pleased and excited to be here with one of our partners, the Science Museum, who, yes, I'm a new trustee here with this organization, and we're partnering with the Science Museum very actively right now on something that I'm really excited about, and that's a program called Read Brave. When I got into office, we noted that a lot of cities have like mayor's book clubs, but one book only kind of, talks to one kind of audience of folks. And we realized we want to use books. We want to use libraries. We want to use literacy to do something really important, and that's to plant important conversations in our community. Last year, we chose the theme housing, and we had books that impacted affordable housing. We had children's books and picture books, and we had a young adult novel, and we had a nonfiction novel. And let me tell you, if you read those children's books, they were horrible. I mean, they were really, really well written, but you'll read them and go like, why would anybody ever do this to a baby fox? It just doesn't make any sense. And so this year, I'm excited to share with you that the theme for this year's Read Brave is our climate crisis. And our librarians have once again worked with us. I haven't read the children's books yet, so I'm sure this year's, you'll be great. But we've curated a set of books that everybody can read. We've got children's books, we've got pictures books, we've got chapter books, we've got a young adult novel that it centers around, we've got a nonfiction book. And the goal is for us to be able to have the conversation about our climate reality so that we can connect those changes that we're seeing right here at the tip of our nose with the climate reality that's happening globally, so that we can make sure that we have the proper sense of urgency around the actions that we can take as a local community. The reason we have to have that whole spectrum of books is so that we can have this conversation. It can span from every preschool to every grad school in our city, so that we can have that big conversation together. I want to tell you that I'm proud to be a city that doesn't just read about climate crisis, that doesn't just talk about climate crisis, but has adopted a very bold climate action and resilience plan. And to share with you a little bit more about that plan, I want to introduce to you a colleague and friend of mine, former St. Paul City Council member, former president of the St. Paul City Council, and current Chief Resilience Officer for the City of St. Paul, Russ Stark.
Thank you very much. Hey folks, it is great to be here tonight talking about my favorite subject. It's actually kind of hard to talk about climate change all the time and keep a smile on your face, but I'm gonna do my best. I've got two challenges tonight. One is speaking right after the mayor, which is not something I recommend trying. And then the second is to talk to you about the bigger challenge that we're all here to talk about tonight, the climate crisis and what we're planning to do about it here in St. Paul. As the mayor said, we are in a crisis, and we are developing this climate action resilience plan for our city's response to that crisis. It is long overdue, but we have been working hard over the last year and a half. We've engaged with hundreds of residents across St. Paul on their ideas for what the city needs to be doing in the coming years to address the crisis. And the plan really focuses on two areas. It focuses on the ways in which our climate has already changed, and the mayor alluded to some of those. A lot of folks don't know, we're already 6 degrees Fahrenheit warmer in our winters than the historic average. That's a tremendous change. That warming hasn't shown up in our summers very much yet, but we anticipate that in the future as well. And so as our city is adapting to warmer winters, eventually warmer summers, and certainly a lot more precipitation, as we're seeing in our river and in our community year after year, there's a lot of things we're going to have to think about doing in terms of infrastructure and in terms of the people and places in our community that are vulnerable to those changes. So we have no choice but to adapt to the ways in which our climate is already changing here in St. Paul. And then the second area of focus of the Climate Action Plan are those actions that we're going to take together across our community, including the city itself, to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions significantly and soon. And so the two high-level goals of the plan are for us, community-wide, to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 50% by 2030 and 100% down to net zero by 2050. Now, it's easy, yeah. That is definitely something to cheer for. That is what we have to do our part to fight what would otherwise be much worse climate catastrophe across the planet. And so in order to meet those goals, we've got some good news to start with. We know that our electric utility here in St. Paul, XL, has committed to 100% clean power by 2050, which is really, really helpful to our larger goals in the community. We know that right next door at District Energy St. Paul, they are working to figure out how to decarbonize their energy and heat production so that we can renewably and sustainably continue to heat and cool buildings right here in downtown St. Paul. And with the electricity sector on this really positive trajectory, the plan really focuses our attention more on the ways in which we heat our buildings, because today we generally heat our buildings by burning fossil fuels, and the ways in which we move around, transportation. So those two areas are real areas of focus. And the plan goes through a series of actions that we're going to need to take together, some of those really soon, and some of them a little bit more over time. But I got to tell you, it's going to take significant work, not only on the city's part, but by all of our partners, the Science Museum, our institutions, our other levels of government, to do some of this work together. And I'm just going to tell you about some of the specific strategies that the plan highlights. One, we're going to need to figure out how to invest significantly more in trees. Why trees? Well, as our climate gets warmer, we're going to need to stay cooler, number one. Number two, our trees absorb a ton of stormwater, and we are getting wetter, and that will actually prevent more of that water from getting to the river and worsening flooding downstream. Three, trees clean the air, and as our climate gets warmer and more challenging, air quality is more impactful on our health. Second, we're going to really focus on building out electric charging infrastructure across the city. We've got a plan that we're working on right now to build out 35 electric charging hubs in St. Paul. We're working with Minneapolis on this plan. They're going to do 35 as well. And at these charging hubs, we're going to have electric car share offered by Our Car, the local car share provider. This is actually going to be the first 100% renewable electricity-powered car share in the country. Absolutely. We'll be launching that service, we hope, by the end of next year, more likely spring of 2021. we are working in our city buildings to transition all of our fixtures from older light bulbs to LEDs over this year and next. The mayor has actually committed $5 million of city resources to do these energy efficiency projects in city buildings, which is a big new initiative. We're also working with all large building owners across the city to start benchmarking our energy use so that we're paying attention so that we can measure the impact as we reduce that energy use together. The other area I mentioned, transportation, which we already talked about, the charging stations. Electrifying our transportation is critical, but we also have to make it easier for ourselves, our neighbors, our visitors, and people who work in St. Paul to move around our community without a car. And so we're investing in making biking and walking safer in St. Paul significantly. And we're also advocating and investing in things like the Gold Line bus rapid transit out through the east side of St. Paul and out to Woodbury. That'll make transit much more accessible on the east side, as well as the B Line, which will be the new bus rapid transit connecting uptown to downtown St. Paul along the Selby Avenue corridor. So we're excited about those. Obviously, some of the big news in the last couple of weeks in St. Paul has been about the development of the Ford site, and we're really excited to share that those new buildings on the Ford site will emit 80% less carbon than the 2005 standard. And that's a big transition and change. We're going to have to get down to net zero within the next 10 years in those new buildings. But we're 80% of the way there in the new buildings that will be built at the Ford site. We're really excited about that. So I encourage you to check out the plan. It's on the city's website, stpaul.gov, or literally if you just Google St. Paul Climate Action Plan, you will find it instantaneously. We're going to create a climate advisory board as part of the next steps moving forward so that we can keep engaging you and other folks in the city in this work, in this critical work for our community. And finally, the city literally can't do this work without all of your help. It's going to take all of us. This is an all hands on deck situation. Thank you for what you're already doing. I look forward to hearing from some of the young people tonight. And thanks to the Science Museum for hosting this important event. Thank you. And Pat Hamilton from the Science Museum is coming up next. Here you go, Pat.
Thank you, Russ. Well, I hope that you agree with me that isn't it amazing that the city of St. Paul has a chief resilience officer? Wasn't that an outstanding decision by our mayor? And I can't think of anyone, frankly, more qualified to do this work than Russ Stark, given his deep bench of knowledge and experience in these issues in the city of St. Paul. So I want to thank the mayor, and I want to thank Russ Stark for working with the Science Museum on the work that climate scientists say is essential to securing our climate future. As the Director of Global Change Initiatives here at the museum, I know that people plus science plus policy equals the potential for the massive change that we all need to secure our climate future. This evening is an opportunity for you to meet one another, to learn more about the problem of climate change, but more importantly, learn about the solutions, and even more importantly, act on what you learn. A lot of experiences and expertise has been assembled this evening for you to enjoy, but in particular, I encourage you to do a number of things. One of them, stay right where you are for the Youth Voices panel, which is coming up immediately. Take an opportunity later on in the evening to write a postcard to your legislators, and then also sit down with Climate Generation, one of our partners, and practice climate conversations. Because after all, we're only 1 week away from Thanksgiving. We're going to be gathering with our relatives around a table laden with food, including the cranky, skeptical uncle. So take this opportunity this evening to practice on how to talk about climate change. And with that, I want to turn the microphone over to one of our partners this evening, Alex Steinman of the Coven, and she's going to introduce our youth panel. Please join me in giving Alex a very warm welcome. Thank you, Alex.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you to Pat, Russ, Mayor Carter, and Alison for the warm, warm welcome. I'm Alex West Steinman, co-founder and CEO of the Coven. You're probably wondering, what is that witchy business up there? We are a community and workspace for women, non-binary, and trans folks. We're located today in Minneapolis, and our new headquarter location will be just up the hill in St. Paul at the end of December. Thank you. Thank you. We'll see you all there. We are passionate about the economic empowerment of women by creating physical and psychologically safe spaces to work, learn, and grow. Our members are running for office, they're building empires, and they're changing the world. We believe in the power and magic that happens when women come together in collaboration. This panel is no exception. The incredible humans I'm about to introduce you to are young activists who've committed themselves to systems change. I've gotten to know them over the last couple weeks, and I'm in awe at their clarity of vision and bias for action. They're participating in programs like the Kitty Anderson Youth Science Center, which provides out-of-school programming for hundreds of underserved youth with the goals of building leadership skills, career readiness, and fostering confidence and appreciation for science, technology, engineering, and math. As Mayor Carter also spoke about, these young people are participating in the Read Brave program through the St. Paul Public Libraries. Read Brave is a citywide intergenerational reading program focused on community issues that started in 2013. Stories are a powerful way to bring people together, and Read Brave invites people to read, discuss, and even take action on critical issues while building relationships. And finally, these panelists are building their own coalitions and organizations. I wouldn't be surprised if all of them ran for office someday. This evening is meant to inspire all of you to make real change by uplifting youth voices. This is about more than the straws you use or whether you compost or not, although I hope you all do. This is about reconstructing systems of power and building a better world together. Without further ado, I'll introduce each of the panelists to kick things off. Nina Berglund. You can come up when I mention your name. Nina Berglund is 20 years old and represents as a young Northern Cheyenne and Oglala Lakota woman. She was born and raised in the Twin Cities and has been organizing alongside other youth against Enbridge's Line 3 proposed pipeline that is currently being pushed to be built in northern Minnesota. She recently has been working to improve and expand her leadership skills, traveling to different trainings, leadership events, and speaking around the country and beyond the colonial borders. She is extremely passionate about uplifting and supporting the voices of the youth in spaces where Native presence runs short. Nina Berglund. Emma McCarthy is a local 16-year-old climate activist. She has been involved in local and national environmental justice work, including co-founding Climate Queens, which is my favorite, an intersectional feminist environmental organization working with the Kitty Anderson Youth Science Center on community education and projects around environmental justice and organizing youth from her school to take action on the climate crisis. Emma McCarthy. Freya Ebbesen is a junior at Open World Learning. As one of the founding members of her school's climate activism club, she is passionate about finding the intersections between environmental justice and technology. She recently created an app that helps the DNR volunteers track the movement of loons and worked with a team to develop an app that helps Ramsey County residents lessen the impact of their yard waste on the Mississippi River. In the future, Freya hopes to work as an activist and software developer with the goal of lessening the impact of climate change upon marginalized groups. Freya Ebbesen. Kathleen Goglai. Kathleen is a high school senior currently attending Harding High School in St. Paul. She's involved in her community, hoping to bring more Indigenous voice in white spaces. She has been previously involved in Minnesota 4-H as an ambassador, but is currently involved with the Kitty Anderson Youth Science Center at the Science Museum and is a member of the YEA, I believe it's Minnesota Corps. She's also deeply cared about the environment and especially about the climate and how it affects our future. Kathleen. And finally, our moderator, Isra Hirsi. Isra is a 16-year-old high school student from Minneapolis. She is a climate and racial justice advocate who is the co-founder and partnerships director of the U.S. Youth Climate Strike. She worked on getting hundreds of strikes organized across the country on March 15th and September 20th. Isra started her climate activism her freshman year of high school by joining her school's environmental club. U.S. Youth Climate Strike started in late January and now has more than 100 organizers. Her work has been covered widespread, and with her identities as a Black Muslim woman in this work, she focuses on intersectionality and has been a long advocate for intersectionality and diversity within the climate justice movement, as well as in her daily life. Isra Hirsi.
Thank you all for coming out today. We have an incredible panel of youth voices tonight. The purpose of this event, of this evening, is not just to inspire, but to share real, actionable steps you can take in your life to raise your voice and lift up those around you who need a platform. Our first question for the whole panel is, climate change has been happening long before us. Tell us when you first got involved and why. Nina, do you want to start?
Hello? Is it okay? So for myself, being a young Native woman, caring about the climate has always been there. I mean, it's a part of our ceremonies, it's a part of our way of life, it's a part of our everyday things that we do. And so why would climate justice not be something that, we focus on every day, considering that our way of life is so involved and so in tune with the very things that we see around us. So since the beginning of, this entire thing with worrying about fossil fuels, worrying about all of this industry, Native people have been targeted. And Native communities and indigenous communities around the U.S. are some of the first to face a lot of the climate disasters that happen. And so for myself, I believe I was in my 9th grade of high school. I was just a freshman, and we started talking about the Keystone XL pipeline. And after learning about it, I said, how would this happen? And throughout the years, I kind of was going through my ways of activism, and I found myself in Standing Rock, in North Dakota. I wish that I come with a more happier approach to climate justice, but I'm frankly irritated. I'm disgusted, and I cannot believe that we got to this point. And I deal with the Line 3 pipeline now that everybody in this room should know about. And so, as a Native woman, this affects my body. We have a spiritual connection with the earth, so this started when I was born. This has always been a part of me, and it'll always continue on as a part of me. Yeah.
So growing up in this time, the climate crisis was always something I was aware of. I truly believe that it's an existential threat and that it uniquely affects our generation. We're watching our world fall apart. Knowing that we may not have a future, and at the same time holding the truth that we are relatively lucky because some people are already dying because of this crisis. So knowing all of that about a year or two ago, I decided that I could not sit by anymore and that I had to take more direct action. So I started attending youth-focused protests around Line 3 and the Minnesota Green New Deal. And I also started getting more involved in local environmental justice groups, and eventually started working on forming my own Climate Queens. And I also got a job at the Kitty Anderson Youth Science Center here at the Science Museum in the environmental justice crew. And that was really where a lot of learning happened for me about the intersectionality of environmental justice and the roles that capitalism plays in it. And it really helped me form my environmental justice education. So kind of once you start participating in this movement, it's just easier to get more and more involved.
Yeah, my story is similar to Emma's. The natural world, being out in nature, specifically in the boundary waters, and doing loon monitoring with the Department of Natural Resources, is something I've always been into and been a part of. So being connected to the environment was always something that was really important to me. And so climate justice activism was kind of a natural transition there. But as Emma said, as I was able to attend these events and learn more, being able to realize that it's more than just polar bears and turtles, that climate disaster is actually endangering people's lives, endangering their well-being today in our communities, locally and globally, is really what pulled me all the way in, and made me realize that we cannot sit idly by and let this happen. We have to be active and get involved.
Originally, I remember getting involved in Minnesota 4-H when I was younger. We were always taking on these field trips to the woods near our school, and I was always really interested in the environment. I remember going outside and our teacher taught us how to recognize bird calls, and that's always been one thing with me. And even as a Native woman, that's really I'm really connected with that. And even just growing up, I was remember going up north, being in the woods, I like the woods. And just recently when I started getting older, I was oh, this is happening. I've never really noticed this before. And especially since within the past 2 years, I was wait, there's actually this is actually gonna happen. I remember when I first started with the Kenny Anderson Youth Science Center, I didn't really know much about climate change, and it was that's when I recently started getting involved with it. Oh, we have to do this. If we're not gonna, no one else is gonna do it. What else is gonna happen? We have to keep going with it.
Going back to you, Nina, the work that you do is to uplift Native voices where they aren't normally present or heard. Tell us the importance of that work, and I guess what exactly are you doing moving forward in today?
Definitely. So being a part of the climate justice movement now for a couple of years here, and being specifically a Native youth, it becomes kind of frustrating seeing as Native people aren't really represented too much. The Standing Rock movement really helped kind of uplift and amplify the voices of Native people, but our presence falls short. Look around. Where are our people? We recognize and respect that you're on Indigenous land. Everywhere you go, you step on Turtle Island, you are on Indigenous land. Understand that there's deep and dark history here that dates back all the way to the beginnings of this country, that our people were targeted. Our people were the first. And where do you find us? On reservations, the throwaway lands that the government didn't want. But now those lands are some of the most rich because everything else has been destroyed. Everything else has been sucked for every single resource that it has. And so Indigenous people are some of the first affected, not only here in the United States, but around the world. And so to include the youth in a movement that is happening on our lands, and to not include us would be a shame. And so for us, we have to try and find our way through this really weird system where we're not really wanted, where we're not really included. So you see, to have another Indigenous person on this panel with me, it's amazing. It's really cool. And growing up here in St. Paul, the kind of talking about climate, it really started specifically here, coming back home. I mean, I've traveled all around talking about, the same thing, but it really came to this reality. That's why we're here with Line 3. When down the street at the Public Utilities Commission last year, they approved a replacement pipeline for a foreign company. That's crazy. And you know, myself and along with 12 other young people, we fought that pipeline and we're still fighting that pipeline. And so I think for each and every one of you is to honor, but also read what my shirt says. Us Indigenous people need our land back. And us Indigenous people hold some of the key answers to this question of how do we stop climate change. Well, our people have been doing this for thousands and thousands of years, so honor us.
Going to you, Freya. There are so many resources out there to educate ourselves on climate change and its impact in the world. You've been participating in the Read Brave program through St. Paul Public Libraries. Tell us a little bit more about the program and how the folks in the audience can participate.
Yeah, so as we mentioned a little bit earlier, Read Brave is a program created by the City of St. Paul that chooses a book to highlight each year. And that book, or a couple books actually, and those books are highlighted and distributed to members of the city and St. Paul Public School students. This year's theme, as Mayor Carter said, is our climate crisis. And one of the books that I've been reading that has been highlighted is The Marrow Thieves by Canadian Métis author Sherry Demeline, which imagines how a dystopian future ravaged by climate change would affect Indigenous Canadian communities. I think that the spreading, the sharing and lifting up of the voices of people in marginalized communities that Read Brave does is really valuable, especially because it does so for young people. I think it's really important to raise young people to be aware of other people's stories, of other people's realities, because that's kind of the only way we're going to come together to create change. So.
Kathleen, tell us about the Kitty Anderson Youth Science Center and the work you've been doing there.
Kitty Anderson Youth the Kitty Anderson Youth Science Center, it's basically like a youth science center that it's specialized for youth that don't usually get their voice involved. And I remember hearing it about the American Indian Family Center. I remember I'm always the only Native student, but it's giving youth that don't usually get a voice, and especially STEM, the voice that we can do. And we're doing tons of work there. We've always found work with water. We've started talking about climate change and even clean energy and what we can do about that. And if you guys want to get involved, you can always talk to some of our our track managers, and keep on just even look up the Science Museum. You'll find us there somewhere.
Emma, one thing you're passionate about is making spaces for underrepresented voices. Talk about the importance of holding space for those that are the least unheard.
The people who don't have as much of a voice in the climate movement are often the people who are on the front lines of climate change. Climate change is an intersectional issue. It intersects with racism. For instance, long-term exposure to air pollution is closely associated with areas of high racial segregation, as well as the location of toxic waste dumps. It also intersects with income and wealth inequality. Global warming trends have accelerated economic growth in richer countries while significantly slowing growth in poorer countries since 1960s. Additionally, who is going to be able to deal with the consequences of the climate crisis? It will be more wealthy individuals. As weather patterns get more erratic and as growing seasons shorten or disappear, food will become an expensive commodity, and who can afford that? And there, again, we see it intersect with food justice. And obviously there are many more intersections than that. So since it's such an intersectional issue, the solutions that the climate crisis demands need to be intersectional and equitable as well. And we aren't going to find those solutions without making space for, truly listening to, and amplifying the voices that have been historically and are currently being stifled.
I guess staying on the topic of intersectionality, Nina, what can non-Native people learn from Native practices to fight climate change?
Yeah. So historically, like I said, being stewards of the land is something that goes way back to our beginning. If you look at where we came from, in our teachings in the Lakota culture, we came from the rock. We came from Ia. And from that, we grew. And in a lot of creation stories throughout indigenous traditions, people, humans, were the last ones created. That everything that we see, all the natural lands, that was created first. We were put here last. But yet, look who destroys the most. Look who has taken the most. It is our people. It is the people all around. It's the people making those decisions in the big corporate rooms. And for Indigenous people, like I said, this gets a little frustrating when we have people coming up to me all the time saying, what's the answer? Give me the answer. And I step back and I say, excuse me, I'm a young person. We're all young people. We don't have the answers. It takes each and every one of us to look and say, what's my piece of the answer? Instead of just asking people, what's the whole answer? That this involves each and every one of us, because not only do we need to think about the next 7 generations, that's what I have to worry about every day, is what am I going to do today that's going to affect 7 generations, my grandchildren? That's a scary thing to think about. It's a frustrating thing to think about, that there's still people who don't view this land as sacred. When I look around, I look at those bluffs on the east side, I think of Wakantipi. I think of the mounds where my ancestors are buried. Those are being affected every day by the decisions of people who don't view this land as sacred. And so you understand why I'm frustrated. You can understand why I have a hard time coming into these conversations, but I have hope. I have the compassion. I have the drive. And so what I think all of you need to take from Indigenous people, because us Native youth, we're taking it too, one step at a time. It wasn't only in my grandparents' generation where our teachings were beaten out of them from the boarding school era. So where are the results of that? So we're trying to find where we fit in with that too also. But I think what we all need to understand is our own personal connection and spiritual connection to this land. That we all have it. That we can thank these lands for our lives. And so instead of trying to move forward all the time, I think we need to start taking steps backwards and realizing where we're heading. Because we cannot focus on the future without addressing the past. I think that's a very valuable teaching you could all take as you move forward in this climate justice work.
I think that was super important. Thank you. Kathleen, you haven't, actually no, Freya. As a young person with a strong interest in technology, what are the ways you're seeing technology can be used in a good way to fight the climate crisis?
Yeah. Personally, I think in the face of impending climate disaster, it's easy to feel really powerless. But for me, technology, specifically coding, software development, has been a really impactful way to kind of get some power back and feel like I'm, doing something. I think, especially Isra, you could probably speak to this on a broader scale. Social media has been a place where a lot of grassroots youth climate movements have started. Apps like, Instagram and Twitter, right, where youth are already spending a lot of time, are enabling these people to connect and organize and grow these amazing movements. And it's a really accessible way to support these movements as well and grow them.
That's kind of how like US Youth Climate Strike started. So definitely social media is like super important, and also a really great way to do outreach. Kathleen, you have an interest in science, which I think is every parent's dream. What interested you in the field, and how can we make more youth excited about STEM fields?
I mean, personally, it's like, sorry, I don't know if it's on. Personally, like again with like 4-H, I always got really interested in that because I remember having like the best science teachers, like from like elementary to middle school, and like even my mentors like throughout like especially like middle school, like they continue with me on to high school. They always like pushed me towards that science, and like everyone like in the Native community, they like, oh, she's like really into science, like, oh, we should keep like talking to her. And like especially for like what I think where like parents should do, like they should surround their kids and like adults that are really interested in science, just like have them like help them find a mentor, like keep pushing them in the direction if you want them to keep going in science. Like I remember like 4-H, like that always like really was a huge part of my life, and like it still is and like always will be, and like that's like my connection to science and always has been.
Emma, you co-founded Climate Queens. What is that, and what impact is it having on your community?
So a while ago, me and my friend, who is also involved in the environmental justice movement, kind of started realizing that the space in conversations about the climate crisis is often taken up by men, especially white men. You know, from everything from the science to the mainstream discourse. So Climate Queens is an intersectional organization that's goal is to amplify the voices of female identifying people and non-binary people in the climate movement. Forming an organization is not a straightforward path, and compared to a lot of other groups, we're still very young. So we've definitely experienced some growing pains. You know, activism, maintaining momentum, not getting burnt out is a real challenge, especially when you're dealing with something as devastating as the climate crisis. But despite that, I've really began to see a community form. People share their climate work and activities and even just parts of their lives, and they're met with support and love and excitement and open ears, and I think that's a really beautiful thing.
One last question before we get to the Q&A. What is one thing that the audience can do tomorrow to help combat the climate crisis? Freya, do you want to start?
We actually were asked this question earlier in an interview today, and I think what the interviewers were really looking for was, as Nina mentioned earlier, like an easy answer, right? What's the answer? And honestly, it's not going to be as easy as these little things, right? Like, reducing your plastic waste is important, eating less red meat, right? But what we really need is systematic change. So please don't let your activism end with, a metal straw or a reusable water bottle. What we really need is to change the culture and the big corporations that are truly hurting the environment. So little ways you could do this. Tomorrow, vote and register people to vote if you can. Donate to local organizations. Some really great ones are the Black Visions Collective, which does some really great intersectional work relating racial justice, economic justice, and climate justice. You can find more about them on blackvisionsmn.org. And also I'd like to highlight the White Earth Land Reclamation Project, which is led by Winona LaDuke, who is amazing if you have not heard of her. Educate yourself. She does a lot of work helping reclaim indigenous land and support those communities. You can find out more about them and donate at welrp.org. There's my plug.
Okay. I just being somebody who grew up in the east side of St. Paul, grew up here in the city. Something that I didn't do enough was go outside and actually feel and touch the land. When I was in D.C., speaking about the same thing during the climate strikes, I said something that was I kind of thought to myself, and I was like, these laws, these policies would be a lot different if they made these decisions outside instead of in these hot, stuffy buildings. And I'm like, so I would just give a suggestion to you all. You put the papers down, go outside, touch the water, and pray.
Those I super agree with. But some things I would add is that you can divest from corporations that don't align with environmental justice and encourage the institutions you're a part of to do the same. Some examples, some local examples. Chase Bank funds lobbying for Line 3. Cargill, which is a Minnesota-based company, has participated in deforestation and the destruction of indigenous land and people around the world, as well as being one of the top 10 polluters in the U.S. food industry. In addition to those things, contact your politicians and let them know that you care and that you're demanding action. If you live in St. Paul, an example would be to read the Climate Resiliency Plan, think about how that will impact your communities, and then give your feedback to Russ.
I really want to bounce off what Freya said. Just vote, register to vote. Especially if you're of age or gonna be of age and soon. Contact your legislators, talk to your youth, see if they want to get involved with it. Attend those climate summits, those climate marches, those strikes. Just keep on getting involved.
I think we're gonna start with the Q&A.
So I'll walk around, and if people have questions, just hold your hand in the air, and I'll be Vanna White.
Hi, thank you all for speaking tonight. I really appreciate it. I wanted to find out more about the apps, and I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but the Freya, if you could tell us a little bit more about the apps you've created.
The question was about some of the apps that you've created.
Through my AP Computer Science Principles course that was offered at my school last year, we learned how to use the free app development or app builder website App Inventor through MIT. It's a really accessible way to kind of get into coding and app development. So I worked actually with Emma through the Technovation project to create an app that would inform Ramsey County residents about the impact that their yard waste and the way they handle their yard waste would have on specifically the Mississippi River. So that's kind of one of those little other things that you can do, right? Kind of think about how you're managing, the chemicals that you put on your lawn and how you manage your waste. And then also I've been volunteering with the Department of Natural Resources for the past couple years, doing loon monitoring, which is just as exciting as it sounds. But in doing that, I was like, there must be a better way to collect this data other than just writing it down on paper. So I created an app where you can just input that data and send it off to the DNR. But yeah, I would just also like to, highlight how I think getting those programs like AP Computer Science and App Inventor into schools and encouraging, young women, especially young women of color, to get involved in those programs is a way to kind of give us and give them a voice, give them some power.
Freya, what's the yard waste app called?
So we're still working on developing it fully, but keep your eyes peeled.
So I know you guys, this isn't so much of a question as it is a request, but I had registered for this event because it's free, so you guys have emails. You guys mentioned quite a few organizations and URLs. If that could be sent out to everybody that registered, that would be a great way to make sure that everyone gets connected. Thank you.
I'm coming.
Is being vegan good for the environment?
Did you hear the question? The question was, is being vegan good for the environment?
Okay, yeah. So the answer is yes, but you don't necessarily have to be vegan in order to help the environment. One, because being vegan isn't always entirely accessible, especially communities of color and low-income communities don't have access or the knowledge of how to be vegan and also how to sustain being vegan. A lot of communities are food deserts like North Minneapolis, and so those resources aren't even there in the first place. So being vegan is a good thing, but not everybody has to be vegan in order to fight against the climate crisis, and we have to shift the conversation from you have to be vegan in order to be a climate activist or in order to care about the climate, and more into, okay, what are other ways in which we can combat the corporations that are causing our food agriculture to be so horrible. I mean, I personally am not a vegan. I would like to be, but I know that I can still organize and do the work without always entirely, I guess, changing my diet when I don't have the ability to.
I guess I can speak a little bit about being like, you know, in the Native community, veganism was kind of like looked at like what we don't know about that. I mean, yeah, it's just the reality we face, especially because Native communities hold some of the highest rates of diabetes. So you would think shifting to kind of a plant-based diet would help us a little bit, but no, because our culture is so intertwined with, the wild game, with deer, buffalo, all of those things. So I actually tried being vegan for like a week with my younger brother, and we got tore apart by our community. They were like, we were the talk of the town. Like, you hear about the Berglund kids? They're trying to be vegan. So I thought about it, in a Native lens about how we could rewrite kind of and put out a better diet, that will not only help our communities, but help the environment, to help the climate overall. I thought of it more as a traditional diet. How can I, how can I buy organic foods, that community members have grown? How can I myself go out and, get deer that has been shot and killed by community members? Think about ways that you can become self-sufficient. I mean, grow your own food. Grow all that is you can. Grow for your neighbors. We need to start thinking about collectively growing food and learning about permaculture, learning about how can we sustain ourselves in a way that cuts out the corporations, because we got all the answers ourselves. We don't need corporations to tell us how to do our stuff.
Thank you. As a fellow young person, I'm only 22 myself, it can be very overwhelming and, quite honestly, just frankly depressing to know that I've been born into this climate crisis without ever doing anything to deserve this or put it forward. And I feel like even though I've dedicated my college education, which I just completed, and my future career, my lifestyle, my passion, everything to this climate crisis and environmentalism, it feels like older people still don't take me seriously, even my own family. And honestly, it's super encouraging to see so many older generations here today, so thank you. But it can be frustrating and discouraging, and it feels like as a young person, I don't have control over a lot of these things. How do you guys keep so much hope and passion to do what you're doing, and all of you are younger than me, and you're crushing it. How? Like, how do you keep that hope and that positivity?
Sure, yeah. So one thing that's been helpful to me is that I have found communities that reflect my ideals and my thinkings about the climate crisis and also my feelings. And they have given me a lot of support. And also, I've had the ability to be active with them and take action in my future and our futures with them, with people who understand the crisis like I do and have the knowledge that I have, and I've found that that's been really helpful.
I can kind of, I don't mean to talk that much, but something that my mom taught me, because I do also run with those frustrations of like, how did we get to this point? I visited the tar sands up in Alberta, Canada on my birthday, on my 20th birthday. I was touring the tar sands where I literally had to have a scarf over my head because I couldn't breathe. And you know, facing that frustration and seeing the absolute devastation of our communities, you know, something that I have to credit for this drive that I have is my ancestors. Because in our teachings, we are taught to think 7 generations ahead, like I said. So I have to credit my ancestors 7 generations ago because they thought of me. And just being in today's world, I've been faced with a lot of, you know, older people who kind of always come up to me and they say, wow, you're so exquisite. Your speaking is so articulate. How do you get it? And I was like, well, you know, like I've had no choice. This is my literal future that's on the line. And if I don't do this work, who's going to? And so I think having a lot of us young people and us youth who are on the front lines have a lot of, we have our job. This is our job. Like I said, this is my mom. She put it like, everybody has their job in this entire world of what they were put here to do. And us youth up here, we were the ones meant to motivate. We're the ones here to push people past that point of, can I do this? And we can get up here and say, you can. It's possible. And so I think for a lot of the older people, that it's time to tell them, it was your generation that put us in this spot, and it's our generation that's going to get us out of it.
So we have some plastic straws at home, and we recently bought some reusable straws. What do you think would be the best way to like get rid of them, or like instead of using them?
I think real quick answer to that one. I mean, if you already bought them, I think it's okay to use them, right? It's a good step, right, to buy reusable straws or, you know, water bottles, right? But like I said before, those little steps are important, but what's really important is systematic change, like Isra was also saying earlier. Placing the blame on the individual is something that also these large corporations tend to do, you know, put out like, you know, infographics on how you, the consumer, can reduce your waste, shifting the attention away from the companies that are, you know, making these straws and making us feel like we need to buy these and creating ads for them. So I think, you know, it's important to do those little things, but it's more important to, you know, divest from companies that are, you know, harming the environment, work on creating those big changes that we need to see.
Thank you. I think that's a great note to end on, because this is so much more than plastic straws. But I've been so inspired by all of you, and I hope you all are inspired as well. Now I will invite you to talk to our scientists who are here in the lobby and meet many of our partners at their info tables and activities. Use this inspiration to learn and do. Take action.